next just a little over an hour, Richard and I are going to divide the time up so that I take 20 minutes, then he takes 20 minutes, and I think my maths has let me down. It's a little under an hour, and then the 15 minutes that we have at the end there will be a chance for you to talk on tables and respond to what we've been saying, but also share what you bring to this event, because there may be questions and lines of inquiry that aren't those that Richard and I pursue, but you'd like to have, as it were, on the agenda. Then it's my job in facilitator mode to make sure that we cover as much of that as possible. So what I want to talk about now is, it sounds hubristic, doesn't it, how to teach vocational education. But it seems really important at the moment, and some of the reasons you've had already. And here's the argument that I'd like to run with you. Of course, it's worth saying to begin with that, as Asha reminded us, there's an awful lot of academic education going on in FE and in learning and skills genuinely. But that's quite well theorised. It's quite well understood. The vocational, and especially the practical elements of the vocational, are less well understood. So the argument goes like this. Vocational education is really important for all the reasons that Asha's outlined. But it's too often dismissed as being simple, especially by its critics. It's not. And what I want to just begin to show is how complex it is. The Germans get this, the Australians get this, the Poles get this, the Americans get this. A number of countries across the world understand that we need to get beneath the words teaching and learning to understand a little bit more about what we mean here. We need to set broad and ambitious goals to understand more about the methods which work in different subjects, to have a much broader palette of teaching and learning methods, and above all, have really good, simple, reliable ways of teachers, coaches, mentors, all the people who hang out in our world to be able to make the best possible decisions for the learners that they're working with. That's the throat-clearing part of the argument. And the so what is, well, yeah, of course. So what's the role of governance? What's the role of governors? Is it different? Is it business as usual? Or, as I'm going to argue, might governors like to get more involved? And if that answer was yes, what might more involved look like? Again, as Asha said, very much respecting your own context wherever you come from. And just finally, before I start, we've had a lot of the context from Asha. And the reason that we're focusing on teaching and learning is not actually because there have been a lot of learned reports written. It's because it's the core of what we do. Teaching and learning is absolutely at the heart of the business of FE. And especially, many of us in this field feel that sometimes it's misunderstood, or sometimes it's dismissed as if it were not as complex as doing the job of general or academic or other kinds of education. Simply not true. The Lingfield report on professionalism talked at length about having a better understanding of what's actually going on between teacher and taught. The Richard review is signally not addressing, I think, some of the issues that really lie at the heart of the apprentice relationship. We cannot leave it all to the employers. We need to listen to employers closely, but there's a real job for us as educators. Ofsted's focus on teaching and learning has focused the mind a little. And Frank McLaughlin's commission also mentioned gives us a real opportunity, but in a resource-constrained world, to take forward some of the recommendations that the sector might like. For that commission, we at the Centre for Real World Learning produced this report. I'm going to draw from it. It's called How to Teach Vocational Education, unsurprisingly, and its subtitle has the P word in it, a theory of vocational pedagogy. But I hope I won't scare you with that, and I hope you'll find it useful and interesting. I'm delighted and surprised to say that 2 weeks ago the House of Lords spent an hour debating our report, which is kind of unusual for a mere practicing academic. There are many ways in which what we're talking about can be misunderstood. And Matt Crawford, in his wonderful book, The Case for Working with Your Hands, has outlined some of them. Of course, the same applies in that last sentence to all vocational learning. It's not just about practical per se. Or in another walk of life, Jacob Bronowski put it wonderfully, the hand is the cutting edge of the mind, he said. What we're talking about is rich, cognitively interesting, and calls on a pedagogical response that perhaps we haven't always given it thus far. By pedagogy, I mean, and this word is widely used in other cultures, but less so in the UK, I mean the art and science and craft and skill of teaching and learning. And then there's a second sentence which says, and that includes the culture in which all of that takes place. Because you can teach in very different ways, and only by getting close up and looking carefully would you notice those differences. So teaching vocational education and allowing a pedagogy to emerge seems to me and to my colleague Guy Claxon and Ellen Spencer, who wrote the report, to require us to look afresh at some of the things that we may or may not take for granted. The first is that it suggests that we might step back and say, what are the outcomes that we're achieving? Clearly we need skilled people, and quite often it comes down to a definition of working competence. But most of us are in this because we believe there are a broader set of outcomes. I'll try and describe them to you. Clearly we need to understand our subject, and it will be different, will it not? Working with a person where you're helping them to deal with bereavement as opposed to a spreadsheet in an accountancy experience or working with resistant materials out on site. Those are different activities, and they may call for different teaching methods, or they may not. It's at least a question that we might like to attend to. We clearly need to know our context, more of that as I go through. And I'm going to argue that we might like to select from as I said before, a wider palette of methods, and that might be helpful. The 6 broad outcomes that we're arguing for, the point of it all, if you like, for us are, I guess the first is surprising, isn't it? That we need young people or adults to be able to routinely do whatever expertise it is we're helping them to acquire. But the second is more complicated, isn't it? The second is the non-routine expertise. As part of the report, we interviewed Andy Smythe, who has many hundreds of apprentices in his travel and logistics business. And he told me that one day the company woke up to discover that a volcano in Iceland that they'd never heard of had done some damage in the upper atmosphere, and all the planes that used to fly in one way were no longer going to be able to do that. Having routinely expert workers was not going to help him there. Having people who could think out of the box, who could solve problems, who could apply things in different contexts, who were resourceful, was indeed what was required. Resourcefulness was Jean Piaget, the great theorist's definition of intelligence. He called it knowing what to do when you don't know what to do. And anybody who's really skilled can do that. And that's why it's wonderful to watch them at work. We need functionally literate workers. I'm arguing that we need something that's a little broader. We need to let the concept of literacy breathe a bit, because it's also about the spoken and other communications that take place between an individual and those working round him or her, and indeed the customer when they're in the workplace. Craftsmanship, wish there was a gender-neutral word, but there kind of isn't. Please suggest one if you've got one, but I think you know what I mean. It's what any passionate craftsperson will show you. It's a passionate dedication to seeing that there's a job well done here. It's a commitment to what Ron Berger calls an ethic of excellence. And that's what you see in outstanding colleges and outstanding classroom studios, workshops, assembly lines, whatever it is. We need business-like attitudes, even if we're not working in a for-profit environment. Many of the young people and adults that you're working with will go and work in third sector situations or social enterprise. That's absolutely fine. But they are in a place where work is taking place, and they will need those kinds of attitudes. And this is not a functionally driven, wholly instrumental job, is it? It's about encouraging people who are great plumbers, great accountants, great engineers, great architects, whatever it is, and they can also continue to learn whatever they need for their lifetime. So it's a lifelong learning, lifetime learning, learning over life agenda as well, and we need all of those. So if you agree with that, then you're starting from a place that says, well, actually, do you know what? The way we do it now, in terms of our pedagogy, in terms of our learning and teaching, may or may not yet be delivering what we say are our desired outcomes. So if that's where we're going, what might that look like in practice? Well, this is too small for you to read, and you'll find there's a handout in the middle of your table if you're interested in looking at it. In the report, we look at a number of different pathways, and here's just the illustration of, in a very practical sense, what this might mean if you were a plumber. There are two other examples which might be helpful to you too. I'm not going to go into them in detail, because those of you interested, we have a chance in the Strand later on to go a little deeper and to consider this. But I hope you'll see that I'm not just filling this with fine words. This is a very practically useful approach to thinking, so what does it mean then? What on a Tuesday morning might it look like for this particular group that I'm working with? I talked about different subjects, and if you look at the FE in Learning and Skills domain, we took these from an FE database of the subjects taught. You'll see that there are very different kinds of things going on. And we asked ourselves the question as part of the research, does each subject require a different pedagogy? Or is it all the same? Do we lump it all together? Is vocational pedagogy just the same thing? No, I don't think anybody thinks it is. Of course, there are some overlaps, and I'll stress those in a second, but if you're dealing with something that is predominantly about people, that may call for certain kinds of approaches. You may want to observe, to use role play, to use simulation, to use a whole range of methods that are begged by that. If your work is predominantly with physical materials, it may be that you need lots of trial and error, lots of expert demonstration, lots of practice, lots of feedback, and so on. If your work is in the bottom right-hand corner of that triangle and to do with what we're calling symbols, which is really languages, whether mathematical or English or indeed technological, then you may be using more of a critical thinking approach. And indeed that area is particularly available to virtual learning. Now that's not to say that any one of those could not be taught in that way. Neither is it to suggest for a second that you could plot in this rather apparently simple way that that's what kind of subject I'm teaching. It's simply, as everything I'm offering you is, it's a tool to invite colleagues to get a little bit more forensic, a little bit more careful and thoughtful about what choices they're making in classrooms and studios and workshops every day. The next part of what we're talking about is, of course, an understanding of context. And the primary contextual variable is, of course, the learners that you're working with. Understanding their prior experience, understanding what they're bringing to this, understanding their dreams, understanding where they're going, understanding the local opportunities for them, the global opportunities for them, as Asha was describing, and really matching whatever you're doing to their state. Some learners are hugely academically qualified, some are less so. Some are hugely confident, some are less so. They've not had the same smooth passage through a general education system. And the other part of the context is, of course, the environment. And that could be the physical environment, and that's to say the resources available to you. If you have a certain kind of physical space, it'll make certain kinds of teaching and learning easier and certain kinds more difficult. But it's also the environment of your colleagues. What skills and human resources do you have available to you too? In the report, that we go through a long list of well-regarded teaching and learning methods. I think one of the things that I'd like to say because there's not time to talk about each of them, and indeed probably not appropriate either. We were struck with the enormous variety of methods. And it contrasted, because I'm in and out of colleges pretty often. If I'm really going to be honest now, so this is not a criticism of you, I'm sure you're an honourable exception, it contrasted with the very narrow range of teaching and learning methods that I personally experience. That's not to say there aren't fabulous teachers. That's not to say there aren't people who are skilled and fluent in the whole range of these. But I just raise that as a governance issue, because unless you know, how can you call to account and support? That would be my argument there. The blend of methods that you choose needs to, of course, be predicated on a sound relationship between teacher and taught. So at the heart of all of this is not a kind of pick and mix smorgasbord. At the heart of this is the relationship that exists between teachers and learners. We know that, don't we? And the culture in which that relationship sits too. And the culture, all the literature says, needs to be one of ambition and stretch and feedback and coaching. Get those ingredients in place and select the right method for the right learner in the right subject. You are halfway to an outstanding teaching and learning experience. You can see there are lots of different ways in which you might, if you were a teacher, faced with these choices, in which you might choose to go down. Pedagogy, on a Monday morning, is about the choices that teachers make, day in, day out, when they're working with learners. At the leadership level, it's the strategic choices that you make when you plan professional development, when you plan teaching and learning, when you plan new courses, when you reflect on how you go about doing something because you're in a new relationship with a higher education institution or with a school or whatever, or with a business. It's quite complicated, isn't it? Just looking at that, and I've tried to present it as simply as I know. So the final thing we offer in the report is a tool. It's not this is right, this is wrong. It's a number of choices which we believe teachers have to make in a day in, day out, reliable way. If your Ofsted passing inspector drops in and says, I'd like to see X, Y, and Z teach, please. We know we need teachers who are set on growth, set on an assumption, as Carol Dweck puts it, that we need growth mindsets here, that everybody has a potential to achieve, and by the way we talk and by the way we give feedback and praise, we can encourage that. We know that the more authentic activities are, the more likely they are to connect to student experience. But it doesn't mean that you have to do everything simply out of the experience of those learners who are working with you. That would be not what education's about at all, would it? Education is about leading out into a world of other opportunities. Can you see the way these work? They're not telling you choose method X. They're saying, if I go like that and self-position, I'm beginning to see that I think I've got this subject and this group, and I want to be over here, I might choose that kind of method. So too, we want young people, if we want to develop their non-routine expertise, their ability to be resourceful, who are confident and able to question and not set on a receive mode and certain. We need both practice and theory. There is a tendency in FE and in academia to give too much theory and not enough practice, or to give it in the wrong order. Interestingly, when you look at the research, you don't always need to have the theory before you start the practice. Sometimes it's better to have a bit of practice and then a bit of theory, and then a bit more practice, and then a bit more theory. It's very complicated. It's very interesting. It's not to be reduced to a simple edict. We know, too, that increasingly, although it's difficult in terms of the organisation of places, workplaces operate on weeks, increasingly 24/7 day weeks. We tend to fragment experiences more. We may try timetabling as our need, but the more we can extend the experience, the more we know that will be helpful. By the same token, we can too often default to classroom when workshop might be better. By workshop rather than classroom, I mean in a workshop you get what you need when you need it. You go to what you need to do when you need to do that. There are the appropriate tools and resources to help you, as there are in a workplace. place. In workshops, you often get students of different kinds of talent mingling together. I can think of the Centre for Furniture at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College, which I know well. One end of the furniture studio are apprentices. At the other end are PhD students. That's exactly the workshop culture. All are learning from all. There is a profound ethic of excellence in that place, of the kind that you would be proud if you went there. Our approach to tasks in a world in which teamwork and problem solving and all those things that employers tell us they need absolutely has to have group working. Yet we still, here's a challenge, college, still too often assessment is individually driven. How does your college value group activity, other than in the obvious sporting and musical events where we value it with our applause? How visible do we make what's going on around here? The New Zealand academic John Hattie has written an absolutely wonderful book called Visible Learning, where he looks at research across the world and he takes almost every single thing that anybody in schools or FE has ever thought they might like to do, and he tells you how likely it is to raise attainment. You might like to look at it. His overriding message is that we need to make our processes more transparent. We need to be not just teaching plumbing, but teaching about learning how to become a better plumber and a better learner and more pride in your work, etc., etc. And we're nearly there. Of course, we're not just in a face-to-face world, we're in a virtual world. And that calls on different responsibilities and responses from us. Increasingly, we need to facilitate all the drift in what Ofsted is looking for, is a greater sense of student engagement, student involvement, student shaping appropriately of what they're learning. I hope you will feel, if nothing else, that what we're doing is worthwhile, complex, doable, but just might need us to attend a little more to it. Just might need somebody on the governing, maybe two somebodies on a governing body, whose job it is to constantly come back as the grit in the oyster and say, so what? So what might we do here? My so what's would be, I think, and I hope, I'm told that as part of the McLaughlin Commission, we're going to be encouraged to have something of a sector-wide and sector-led debate on this. We're teaming up with the 157 group to do a little bit of that ourselves. A broadening of scope of the kind that I've been describing. And I think there are some open questions which I hope will sit with us for the time that we spend together, which are essentially what might be different for us as college governors, as chairs, as clerks, as principals, as senior staff. Thank you very much indeed for listening. I have a small number of copies of these because they're quite heavy. I'd be delighted to share those with you. For now, though, thank you very much for listening to me. Thank you. So it's my pleasure now to invite our next speaker to the stage. He needs very little introduction to you. He is Richard Atkins, principal at Exeter College, and he has some great stories and great experiences and wonderful teaching and learning to share with you. Colleagues, please put your hands together and welcome Richard Atkins.
Hello, good morning. Welcome. It's a real privilege and a pleasure to be with you all here in Manchester this morning. I'm delighted to be here, and I agree with Asher. It's a real privilege to address so many governors. Being governors, you'll know it's a good idea if I take my watch off, though, and keep an eye on the clock. Being a principal, I'm not short of a word or two, so I better keep an eye on the clock. And I think this is going to be an essentially practical presentation. I'm very aware that I'm all that stands between you and a discussion round the table with some interesting colleagues who you may or may not have met before. So I'll try and keep strictly to the time and to the topic. A couple of other introductory remarks, something about me. I've been at Exeter College as principal about 11 years, I think, and I was previously principal of a college in Somerset, so I've been doing this job for quite some time. So my college, and professionally, this is not about an overnight success story. This is about a long piece of work together in a college to move things on a journey to a position in recent times where we've been judged in a number of ways outstanding and got very, very positive feedback from various sources. So it's about a journey, quite a long one. I thought what I would do is tell you a little bit about the story about the no-notice pilot inspection we had last year, with apologies to anybody who's heard it. The good news is, for the sector, is that story is about to become old hat, because I know this term 2 general FE colleges have been judged outstanding by Ofsted, and I think that's really good news for the sector, because it had been a long time. I think we were the first college, weren't we, for about 2 years to get it last year, and we were reaching 3 years where no general FE college was going to get outstanding. So I'm delighted, and one of the colleges involved have done a lot of work with us, so I'm doubly delighted that they've achieved outstanding. And I think those reports are due to be published very soon, and I'm sure they'll be widely read in the sector. So that's my story, is I hope an interesting and relevant one, but I think once those reports come out and we see a few more, people will get a wider base of colleges to draw lessons from. I'd like to say something about why I believe governors must be involved in teaching and learning. I don't think it's optional. I think it's just as important as keeping an eye on the balance sheet and the management accounts, and something about how governors can do that. And I thought really if you're going to, some of you will choose to come to the workshop that I'm doing with Richard Dimbleby later on, and I'm quite happy to go into more detail in that about some of the practical ways that governors in my college get involved in developing and monitoring the quality of the teaching and learning. I think the last thing I wanted to say as an introductory remark, I really hope you enjoy the 2 days. I always find with conferences the biggest benefit maybe is a bit of reflection about where I come from, my own context, and trying to draw a few lessons from what I've heard from the platform, from what I hear from others. Now, the last time I heard Asher speak, I was stood on the lawn of the British High Commissioner's residence in Delhi, wasn't I, Asher? And Asher gave a brilliant speech with Matthew Hancock. What that did for me, actually, was you go abroad and look from another part of the planet back at the English FE system, and you see a lot of the things we do really, really well. And I sometimes think the sector and those close to the sector beat us up a bit about all the things that need improving, and there are things to improve. But you'd be surprised when you stood in other parts of the world promoting what we do as a sector, there's a tremendous amount to celebrate. I also agree with Ash's comments that there have never been more opportunities at the moment for colleges. And in my long career as a principal, I've never known a period really with such fantastic opportunities. Right, enough of the opening remarks, on to the story. That's Exeter College. I'm not going to run through that. It's just so that you can draw a context. We cover most of the curriculum areas. We're involved in pretty well everything that goes on in the FE sector, with the exception of pure land-based provision. And that just gives you an idea of the context. And that's our mission. I probably need to tell you something about why the board agreed that 5 years ago next weekend. We recently had a good inspection, which probably slightly disappointed us. And then about a week later, we had one of the very first notices to improve. Now, you know that in a school, a notice to improve is a really serious thing. It normally means the head goes, the governors get replaced. In FE, they introduced them and began to sort of experiment with them. And I think we got one of the very first ones back in 2008, which I hasten to add the following year, they changed the criteria, so we wouldn't ever have got one again. But you can imagine how upset the governors and the college were. And in Devon, as you all know, we're quite a sort of sleepy, easygoing crowd, really. But when we're wounded and feel an injustice has been done to us, it doesn't half motivate you. So I think for the governors, that was a real catalyst about feeling that something had been done to the college, which they felt was unfair. I won't go into the details, but essentially it revolved around AS levels. And whether, the fact that you do 4 in the first year and 3 in the second, and everybody who dropped one was regarded as a failure. So there was a hold, which, as I say, the following year was taken out. As a result, I think the board, when they agreed this, were quite galvanised. And the words that are missing there are anything to do with Ofsted or inspection. I think the view the governors took is we want the people in our community, in Devon and Exeter, to feel that this college is doing a brilliant job and is outstanding on our terms. And over the next 12 to 18 months, we moved from self-assessing as good to self-assessing as outstanding, so that when Ofsted in 2011 announced that they would revise the Common Inspection Framework and come up with a new framework, and I knew in the past whenever they'd done that, they carried out some pilots, I wrote in and said, could we please be a pilot? Because we've now been self-assessing as outstanding for 3 years, and we've no way of, we'd like some external judgment of that. And I also said, I understand you're going to introduce this, you can buy an inspection. And I said, I want to be the only idiot in the sector who rings you up and says, I'm prepared to buy one. So they came back and said, well, we'll consider you, come on the training, we're going to run a number of pilots in different ways during the year. So I went on the training with my deputy in the October with Ofsted for the day, and they said, if we choose you to be a pilot, you'll know well before Christmas, and that's it. So by middle of February, I'd heard nothing, and I told the governors that we'd, having risk assessed it, and I thought it would be a good idea to be a pilot. We hadn't been chosen. Everybody could stand down. The staff, whom I'd never really involved very much in the discussion, because I'd always assumed we'd have 3 weeks' notice, we just left it, really. And then I got a phone call that said, in the next 3 months, we're going to carry out a couple of absolute no-notice pilot inspections. We're just going to turn up, walk to the door, because we have a new chief inspector called Michael Wilshaw, who started 6 weeks ago. You'd have heard of him and seen his photograph. And this is one of his big ideas, and we want to see what that looks like and what it feels like. So we want to send a normal full inspection team in, give you absolutely no notice. It'll happen in the next 3 months. Are you up for it? And I said, well, yeah, probably. And they said, the only condition is you tell nobody. I thought about that, and I thought about my chair and my relationship with the governors and everybody, and we decided to go ahead. A month later, maybe more, I got a phone call at 9:20 in my office saying, we're on the train, it arrives at Exeter St David's in 15 minutes, we'll be in reception at 10, and we want to be carrying out observations by midday. And you can imagine when I sent the email to all staff saying, Ofsted are here, they'll be here in 20 minutes, and we'll start observations within 2 hours, there was an electric atmosphere in the college, and the response was absolutely brilliant, actually. And whenever I or any of my colleagues have spoken in the last 12 months, and my colleagues have done a lot more of this than I have, probably the second time I've done this sort of thing, several of my colleagues have done it, the one question you all ask afterwards is, and honestly, I didn't tell them. Honestly, I didn't. And everybody asks the staff, oh, surely Richard tipped you off. Surely you all knew. Honestly, they didn't know. Now, you can either call me a right sod as a principal for not telling them, or you can say I have enormous integrity, or I'm a mug, or I'm naive, but I didn't tell anybody. So genuinely, nobody knew they were coming. And it was an amazing week, really, and the response was absolutely brilliant. And I think one of the reasons it's gained such interest is, of course, locally, it got us enormous credibility. Because the man on the Clapham omnibus, or the woman on the Clapham omnibus, thinks that's how you should inspect things, don't they? Because they say, well, why don't inspectors just walk in, like they do to our college nursery, for example? So we have had enormous interest in the process ever since we volunteered to take part, and enormous interest in the outcomes. And the outcomes for us were obviously very, very good. We were the first college for at least a couple of years to get outstanding across the board. We had a full inspection team of about 15 inspectors. They carried out about 60 or 70 observations. Their observation profile and our own was very, very close, which helped, and they validated our self-assessment that the college was outstanding, which has enhanced our reputation, did a lot for staff morale, and has helped student recruitment. Now, here's the catch. Because it was a pilot and I volunteered, it doesn't count. So, in fact, we're still a good college. So every time you hear Michael Wilshaw or Matthew Coffey speak from a platform, they'll always talk about a good college in the southwest which volunteered for a no-notice pilot and got outstanding, but we still have yet to be officially inspected. We don't know when that'll ever be, but given that they now work on a risk assessment basis, we might never be outstanding officially for a long time, but we appear to be better known than any college that ever got outstanding. So the trade-off has been really curious. And I think the governors feel overwhelmed it was the right thing to do. It was a risk, Clearly, if we hadn't got outstanding, we'd have probably, would have kept quieter about it, I suppose, in our own community. Nationally, genuinely, we have made no effort at all to promote this. There has been enormous interest, because I think many principals, many staff have thought about what would it be like in my college if Ofsted rang up at 9:20 on Monday and 16 of them were there by midday and they'd carried out something like 25 observations by tea time. It's just worth thinking about what that will feel like, and something I keep in mind the whole time now when I walk around the college. So that was the process that we went through. I think the lessons we learned, I mean, obviously the other little bonus is that we then afterwards, a month later, had quite an engagement with Ofsted about the new inspection framework. So Michael Wilshaw spent the day in the college, Matthew spent the day, we've had several other inspectors come along, and we had a chance to talk in depth really about the new framework. Well, the first thing to say is we really welcome the focus on teaching and learning inevitably, which is one of the reasons I'm here. We thought it was much better than 3 weeks' notice. Our staff overwhelmingly preferred it, and they would rather have no notice than the 48 hours. I'm the one who argued for the 48 hours. Not least because very, very occasionally I go to places like India with Asher, and I thought if I was on a plane going to India on a Sunday, it would take me till Wednesday to come back. And I didn't think it was fair necessarily on everybody to have absolutely no notice all the time. But if you ask my staff, they would overwhelmingly say, why didn't they go for no notice completely? They much preferred it, and the students as well. The staff view is very strongly that 3 weeks was much worse for them, because although the staff got worked up, they said the management got much more worked up. So the impact on the staff was them getting worked up, and then all these other people sending them emails the whole time getting even more worked up. So they thought it was much, much better. There was a big implication for the internal nominee. We had no base room. We hadn't picked the areas. The inspectors turned up. They picked almost all our grade 2 areas and none of our grade 1 areas. So we had a whole debate about how we could get a little bit of one or two of our grade 1 areas seen. We had employer visits to cope with. We have a big apprenticeship contract across the southwest. We have some partnership work. So we had to fix all that up. So we ended up with 3 internal nominees, really. My deputy, and he had 2 deputies, really, an assistant principal head of quality. And they had to work as a team extremely hard throughout the week to keep the process going. But it wasn't insurmountable. Now, I know people were throwing back, oh, you can't possibly do this to colleges that have this sort of provision of that. I believe that you can do a lot, actually. If you've got the right relationships with employers, right relationships with partners, you can do a lot. And I thought there were new requirements for Ofsted and their inspectors. I'm really pleased they've gone for the regional inspector model. I'm really glad they talk more about performance management within Ofsted. I think that is a need. I talked very frankly to them about that. I thought that we had some great inspectors and some inspectors, 1 or 2 that weren't so great. I've had a long-standing concern about 2 things. One, I don't really like inspectors inspecting their local college when they live in the area. And if you live in Exeter, I can assure you, you have a disproportionately large number of Ofsted inspectors, school and college, who live within 20 miles of your college. You think about quality of life, and I'm an inspector, I'll assure you. So I've always felt that's not a very good idea. And the other thing is I like to see people with current expertise, really, who are up to speed, up to date, and can contribute to the process. That's not what I always have seen. I think I've been through about 4 Ofsteds. It's not what I've seen some of that, and then I've seen the odd person who's not up to speed, not contemporary. So I think there is an issue there. I also think that some of the inspectors struggled with the no notice. They had liked the 3 weeks more than us, because they'd had 3 weeks to go through the data line by line, identify exactly what questions they'd ask. The team that came to me were only given the data on the Monday morning. They had to really think on their feet, really. And what interested, you can imagine, someone in never mind my job, some of my team thought that was an eye-opener for some of them, about how fast you had to think on the feet and how quickly you had to decide what you were going to do. Clearly something some of my team would say was their regular day job. So those are some of the lessons that came out of it for us, and I think for Ofsted. We had a really, really good discussion with Ofsted. I know things between the sector and Ofsted haven't been easy the last year, and I'm all for giving Ofsted difficult feedback, but I also, the dialogue I had was definitely a two-way one, and I thought they took some of the feedback as well as giving it out. But primarily, we welcomed the focus on teaching and learning. What I would say is that we've been working at that for a long time, and I think one of the challenges is this inspection framework is not one where within 3 weeks you can move 1 or 2 grades, or by getting all the files in order or getting all the evidence in order, you will jump grades. I think a lot of this is about culture and climate, and culture and climate takes time to establish, to embed, and so on. So how do we achieve the outstanding at a time when colleges were not doing so? I think we had a relentless focus on teaching and learning for a long time. I think that was driven by the governors, and I'll say more about that in part, and I'll say more about that. We're really, really big on right student, right course, and I'm sure many of you are, but we're really big on it. So we want students to go on programs they're going to succeed at. We are absolutely up for giving the tough messages as well as friendly ones. We don't want people to start courses that they're going to struggle with, drop out of, fail, whatever. I think we have a strong student-focused ethos and culture. Learner voice, I'll say something about in a minute. Obviously, we have great staff, as I'm sure you do. I think our self-assessment was extremely accurate, and we have very robust improvement strategies. We've been financially reasonably stable, which has clearly been a benefit. And strong governance, very much focused on teaching and learning, particularly in the last 4 or 5 years, but longer really, many ways. So if I just talk a bit about the governance, given the conference today and the audience. First of all, the chair was key. He and I would share a view that we had an open evening earlier in the week, as you do. We had apprenticeship awards night before last. At those events, nobody asked me what the balance sheet looked like or what my management accounts looked like. They all asked me about could they meet teaching staff, what were our results like, could they meet some of our learners, could they see some of our specialist facilities. So I think our chair and I have shared that for the chair at that time for a long time, and the way that manifested itself is that he saw quality and standards as the key committee in the college, really. At least as important and prominent as what we call business services, F&GP, and perhaps more so. And that was the committee that he probably took the most interest in. We have accountants on the board, we have property specialists. It is really important. Clearly, if you are in terrible financial difficulty, one has to, and I have been donkeys years ago, so I've been that sort of principal, and you do sometimes have to do that for a while. But we noticeably and deliberately promoted the quality of governors who joined quality and standards, the role it played, the way those issues were reported to the main board, the role that committee played within the college was all positively promoted over a period of time. The governors played a key role in data, because governors, a number of governors with a business and other backgrounds were very, very good with data. Now, data is only part of the story, but it does enable you to ask a lot of questions. And we were blessed. You need a bit of luck, don't you? You'll know that the Met Office relocated to Exeter about 10 years ago. So we have the chief forecaster on the board. Now, you'd have thought, wouldn't you, the chief weather forecaster wouldn't be very good at predicting things. But what I've discovered about the Met Office is all to do with numbers. And as you know, they moved to Exeter to get nearer the weather, but it hasn't helped. But Alan has been brilliant at asking questions about data, because that's how he forecast the weather. Every night before he fed it into the BBC and all the rest, he analysed enormous amounts of data to tell him whether it was likely to rain in Exeter or snow in Manchester or whatever. So he brought a particular expertise that actually informed our teaching and learning strategy very much. They test our quality assurance systems and continue to do that, and I can talk about those in the workshop, but they do not carry out teaching observations like some they do in some schools, but they do get involved in a number of review processes, and all members of that committee will have been involved in those during a period of time, so they can all speak with some knowledge about the way that we quality assure teaching and learning and the student experience. And because I've been doing the job a long time, I'm really keen on governance and not management, but my governors would say he is, and they challenge that sometimes, but I'm very keen that we know what the difference is as well. But the governors have been absolutely fantastic. I don't think any of them are here today, so I can say that. Otherwise, it might go to their heads and they might give me a difficult time at the residential next week. But they have been fantastic at leading this work. And I thought it was very brave of the chair to promote Quality and Standards Committee and teaching and learning so noticeably 5-6 years ago or more, well before it was fashionable to do so in the way that it is now. I think learner voice has been a huge part. We, like everybody else, we have student governors. I lead the learner voice with my deputy. So all of the learner voice is led by the two of us. I meet with students regularly. I have informal lunches with groups of students pretty regularly. They are pretty informal. I do ask about their experience. I do ask about the performance of teaching staff. I am reasonably in touch in a fair, it's not a huge college, but 5,000 full-time students keeps us busy, and I don't know, 1,000 apprentices and whatever. So I do that noticeably so that people realise that is a really important thing to do, is to listen to students. Now, they're not always right, and not everything they say, but I've probably been around long enough to filter the things I don't need to hear from the things I do. My deputy runs the whole process through the college, and it has to be said that Ofsted loved that, and I think it's a good thing. We do a lot, like I'm sure you do, of you said we did, so we do a lot of feedback. I mean, a lot of our investment over the last 5 years has been, a number of that has been noticeably student-led, and we feed that back to students. We link a number of things in the strategic plan, and so all of those things back to learner voice. And I think what we kind of work on is word of mouth, really, culture and climate. So we work very much on students going out and talking well about the college, talking about the fact that we listen to them, and that our plans, our investment, our teaching and learning strategies are focused to a significant extent on feedback from them. And I'm only sharing that with you. Many of you in the room may already do much of this. I'm simply sharing it with you because these are the things that Ofsted really liked in this framework, I think. That's what they really liked. There were very few meetings with managers. I mean, I think in the previous inspection we'd had, I don't know, what felt like about 56 meetings with every manager going. In fact, the same manager would be in about 7 meetings. And since we'd spent 3 weeks rehearsing the script, they gave just about the right answers. This time, there must have been 3 meetings, 2 meetings. Everything was about observation or other contact with students, coffee shops, corridors, early morning, late night, or observations. It wasn't about structured meetings. So it's a much more difficult process to manage, if you understand me. It's not impossible. And I've just got 1 minute to go, so I'm going to have to go very quickly. I told you principals could talk. Right, I promise I'm coming right to the end. It all takes time. We've been on a journey. I think it's increasingly difficult, as I said at the beginning, to manufacture an outstanding result at very short notice. I'm not here to defend Ofsted, and I'm sure that they don't get all their judgments right. And I can see that the relationship with parts of the sector and Ofsted remains very tense. But I do believe the focus on teaching and learning is the right one. And what impact has that pilot had on us? Well, you'll know some of that, and me being here today as a part of that. And it's been very rewarding for the whole college, really. And if I was to close with any words, it would be to urge you as governors, if you're not already, to work to ensure that the governance is focused very firmly on teaching and learning. Not at the expense of managing the balance sheet or the property or the MIS, but the staff and the students know that the reason you're there is to listen to, improve the experience of, raise standards for students and teaching and learning. I shall stop there because you're waving at me. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thanks a lot, Richard. We're only getting you to stop because, as you say, it all takes time and we want to fit as much as we can in, and we want you to have a short amount of table time now. So by saying over to you, what we'd like you to do is spend 5 minutes on your tables, introduce yourself. What was that to you? What kind of questions struck home to you? What thoughts do you have? Share those on tables. There are lots of blank pages over there over the period of the conference. We'd love you to post different thoughts and comments for the different, especially the 3 strands this afternoon. And in 5 minutes' time, I'm going to pop up again, and Richard or I will respond to anything you have to say for one more 5 minutes lot of of time together. And in case you're worried about the overall time, we have built in a certain amount of time between getting from here to your next workshop, which starts at 12 o'clock. So worry not. 5 minutes on tables. Please enjoy each other's company. So who'd like to start us, please? Who'd like to start off? The microphone will come to you. Just give us a 30-second blast of what you were talking about on your table, or if you prefer, simply what's going on in your own mind in response thus far. No pressure. Colleague here, microphone coming. It's over here. Please be kind enough to stand up and just be kind enough to tell us who you are and where you're from. Hold that microphone very close to the... it's on, but it just needs to be very close.
My name's Gareth Jones from Newcastle-under-Lyme College. We were talking about the effectiveness of quality and standards committees and how you measure the added value performance of teaching on a regular basis, and to monitor trends that we're developing as far as your individual colleges are concerned.
Thank you very much indeed. Another voice as quick as you can. Just show us a hand. It could be a question, a thought, a summary. Oh, two over here. One, who's the nearest microphone? Coming right round. It's just coming, sir. That's fine, yeah. And then one this table here. Yep.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Josie Thurkel. I'm the chair of Barnsley College. And one of the things that we talked about briefly, very briefly, was if we don't find it uncomfortable as governors at all to have experts in legal matters or financial matters and challenge and be very strong and be secure in the data. And it echoes what the colleague said over there. And I'm worried about the how of what happens on teaching and learning. I happen to have an education background, however, so I feel comfortable about that, but some of the way the data is presented, it feels like interference to me if I say or interfere when we shouldn't, because I'm a governor, I'm not actually an executive that's meant to be doing the job. So it's the how of it that just has that big question mark that we're worried about.
Thank you very much indeed. That goes back to Richard's governance, not management point on his slide. Colleague on this table here.
I'm John Hilborn. I'm chairman of Queen Alexandra College. It's one of the 70 specialist colleges, and for my sins, an ex-HMI of the old sort, not of the new sort. We only introduced ourselves on this table, but there was one thing that was worrying me right the way through the presentations we've heard that I'd like to share with you. And that is, I'm not sure which model of governance, given the discussion about the relationship between boards and executives, which started with the Cadbury report, fits in with the model that Ofsted, Wiltshire, and indeed ELSIS is asking us to move towards. And unless we take advantage of what our friends like Adrian Cadbury have done in looking at how that non-executive directorship role takes place, then I think we might make the same mistakes that they've made.
Thank you very much indeed. Time for two more comments. Sir, in the middle here, and then at the front. Somebody dash into the middle, please. Just mind just raising your hand so that we can not waste time. Over there, please. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jo Weimer. I'm chairman of Bicton College, which is a land-based college based down in Devon. And one of the things that's concerned us, we have moved 2 years ago to a Carver-esque model of governance. We meet monthly, but we don't have an Education or Quality and Standards Committee as a separate committee. And I suppose what concerns me is that we may have lost some of the detailed expertise in quality and education because we look at it as a board across the piece on a monthly basis. So it's the loss of that committee.
Okay, there's some expertise, some how-to, some bigger pictures about governance approaches and learning from corporate reviews. Sir, colleague at the front here. Thank you.
Hi, Mark Kitely from Bedford College. Asher started off by asking us to put us into context And your own presentation drew out, highlighted 4 countries. I think it was Poland, Australia, you said we all get, or they all get it. How do we? You then threw out a slide which said, so what? And I would put it to colleagues here, why? Not what, but why? And the 4 countries you highlighted all aspire to compete in the manufacturing global industry. And on your slide, there's no manufacturing. Why? Do we want to produce hairdressers and plumbers and all these soft services industries, which is fine, and that's a skill set that society needs, but actually we need to compete in the global market, in manufacturing, in making things. And I think the governors of colleges need to look at their local industries and find out how they can push the industries to aspire to compete in the global market and then provide them with the skills.
Thank you very much. No intended omission. We simply took a cut of the FE database. That's absolutely at the core of much of the work that we do. Thank you for that. Richard, any last thoughts from you? Do you mind to just come up here? Anything you've heard there that you'd love to respond to? Otherwise, we'll head off to our sessions.
No, only for me. You can't stop me saying something. Only for me to say that I still feel the central core of governance is to ensure there is in place. It doesn't matter whether it's. I really don't all the fine detail between Carver models and Cadbury models, and I've looked at them over the years. In fact, I've operated Carver for a bit in my last college. But monitoring and assuring yourselves about the quality of teaching and learning, for me, is one of the absolute core purposes of governance. And if you're not getting the data you want, you need to keep asking for it.
Wonderful, masterful end to that. Thank you very much, Richard. Thank you for your presentation. Colleagues, we now